The chapel was silent, except for the sound of rain tapping softly on the stained glass windows. The flag-draped casket stood at the front, surrounded by rows of mourners dressed in black. But in the back of the room, a man stood alone, his worn jacket soaked through, his cap clutched tightly in calloused hands. No one spoke to him. No one even looked his way. The whispers had already begun. "Why is he here?" one woman muttered. "He shouldn't be anywhere near that casket," another said under her breath. The man's name was Daniel Ross, a single father, a former sergeant, and a veteran who had seen more loss than most people could bear. But today, he was here to say goodbye to someone who meant more to him than anyone would ever know. Still, the glares, the cold shoulders, the hushed judgments, they pierced deeper than any bullet ever had. Daniel had fought in wars overseas, but nothing prepared him for the battle of coming home, to a town that looked at him like a ghost. His wife had left during his second deployment, leaving him to raise his son, Jack, alone. He worked 2 jobs, trying to give his boy a normal life. But when word spread that the fallen soldier in the casket, Captain James Whitaker, had once served under Daniel and never came home from the same mission Daniel had survived, people began to talk. They said Daniel should have saved him. That maybe if he'd done things differently, Captain Whitaker would still be alive. And now, at the funeral, those same whispers followed him like shadows. Daniel took a deep breath, eyes fixed on the casket at the front. "I just need a moment," he said softly to the usher when he tried to stop him from entering. "Please, just one moment." But the usher shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir. The family requested privacy." Daniel stepped back, his heart heavy. He'd promised himself he wouldn't make a scene. He turned toward the doors, ready to walk away. That's when the doors swung open behind him. A hush fell over the room. Every soldier, every officer, even the widow in the front row stood to attention. 4 stars gleamed on the shoulders of the man who entered. His presence commanded silence. General Nathaniel Carter, a living legend. The man whose name was synonymous with courage. He walked with slow, steady steps down the aisle until he stopped beside Daniel. For a long moment, the 2 men just looked at each other. The crowd watched, confused. Then the general turned toward the mourners and said, his voice firm but thick with emotion, "Let him through." No one moved. No one dared to breathe. The general looked back at Daniel, eyes shining with something that looked like both gratitude and sorrow. "You should have been the first person at that casket," he said quietly. Then, turning to everyone else, he raised his voice. "This man saved my life." Gasps filled the room. Daniel froze. The words didn't even seem real. The general took off his cap, holding it to his chest. "Years ago, in Kandahar, our convoy was ambushed," he began. "Bullets flying, smoke everywhere. I was pinned down. I thought I'd never see another sunrise. But Sergeant Daniel Ross here, he ran through open fire, dragged me out of the line of fire, and carried me nearly half a mile under enemy attack. He didn't ask for medals. He didn't ask for thanks. He just saved my life and went back for the others." The general turned toward the casket, his voice breaking slightly. Captain Whitaker didn't make it that day, but it wasn't because Daniel didn't try. He carried James on his back through the mud until his legs gave out. He never left him. The room went silent. Even the widow, who had been crying quietly at the front, looked up at Daniel, tears streaming down her face. Slowly, she stood and nodded. "Please," she whispered, "come say goodbye." Daniel's throat tightened as he walked down the aisle. The crowd that had once judged him now parted in silence, their eyes lowered. He stopped at the casket, resting his trembling hand on the polished wood. "I'm sorry, Captain," he whispered. I really tried." He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was the general. "He knew that," the old man said softly. "We all did." Daniel stayed there a long time, his head bowed, his heart heavy but lighter than it had been in years. When he finally turned, his son Jack stood at the back of the room, eyes wide. Daniel motioned for him to come forward. Jack walked up, small and nervous, holding a folded paper in his hand. "Dad," he said softly, "can I leave this for him?" Daniel nodded. Jack placed the paper on the casket. On it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for saving my dad." The general knelt beside Jack and smiled. "Your father's a hero, son. Don't ever forget that." As the ceremony ended, people began to approach Daniel, offering handshakes, quiet apologies, words of respect. The same town that had once turned its back on him now looked at him with something new, honor. Outside, the rain had stopped. A beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, lighting up the rows of flags fluttering gently in the wind. Daniel stood there, his arm around his boy, watching the casket being lowered into the earth. There was sadness, but also peace. Because finally, after years of silence, the truth had been spoken. And as he walked away from the grave, the general's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes the bravest acts are the ones no one sees. Daniel smiled faintly, looking down at Jack. Come on, son, let's go home. For a long moment, the camera lingers, on the grave, the folded flag, and the sunlight breaking through the clouds. Then the narrator's voice comes in gently. If this story moved you, honor their memory by hitting that like button, and subscribe for more real stories of courage, sacrifice, and redemption. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change everything. The screen fades to black, with the sound of wind and distant church bells echoing in the background. And somewhere in that silence, the world remembers a forgotten hero.